Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. There are 13 people left alive. Some will say that they were unlucky, but they certainly turned out to be luckier than those who did not survive an emergency landing on a remote Pacific island. The battered survivors clustered on the beach. Slowly, they began to organize, trying to find shelter, water, and food. The pilot, the oldest of the remaining ones, did not survive. Margaret seemed to naturally take responsibility, checking on how people were doing and starting to organize everything. It is noteworthy that 4 friends survived: Tom, his wife Helen, Bill, and his wife Mary. They were lucky that they were in the tail. Few survived from the front of the plane. They were a middle-class married couple in their 40s, enjoying a vacation together, traveling to the islands of the Pacific Ocean, when they booked a cheap charter for sightseeing. They were in good physical shape and liked to travel on their own, but most of their trips were designed and planned by Tom. He and Helen were well suited to each other. Both were adventurous and energetic. Tom is 7.5 centimeters taller than Helen, whose height was 1.73 meters. Endurance sports, cycling and running, kept him in good physical shape, but not swinging in the gym. Helen's long curly brown hair was usually styled in a ponytail, leaving bangs over beautiful deep brown eyes. She was smart and quick-witted, but sometimes she could be quite blunt and straightforward. They got along well with the quieter and quieter Bill and Mary. Tom and Bill had been friends all their lives, had known each other since they were 10 years old, when they ran around the streets together, and fortunately their wives got along equally well. Bill was fit, played golf, and engaged in activities that did not require much effort. Mary went to the gym and swam with Helen. Her shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes matched her ebullient personality. Both were hugely popular with a wide range of friends. Most of the passengers were a group of rugby players, but only 5 of them survived. Another couple survived the crash. Mike and Kelly were about 20. There was also a seriously injured and unconscious lone woman. The last survivor was Margaret, their leader, a 57-year-old widow and a retired nurse. They were at the farthest point of their tour on an outdated twin-engine turboprop aircraft when a storm suddenly hit. For several hours, they were carried by a strong wind, under thunder and lightning. Tom wondered if anyone else knew about their predicament, and his doubts were heightened when the pilot announced that they would have to make an emergency landing and that everyone needed to get ready. The impact on landing was severe. The small plane was torn in half after it flew past the intended beach and crashed into the water, and then into the reef. The immediate consequences were mass death, injury, and shock. Survival has become a priority. Now only the back of the plane was visible, dangling precariously on the reef as the survivors reached the shore in torn clothes. There was little of value left on the destroyed plane: some food, clothes, and a first aid kit, which did little to help them survive the first night, as the storm was still raging. The next day was completely quiet and calm. During the initial search, they found several shelters made of ship planks that had long been overgrown with jungle. They guessed that the boards were from a 19th century clipper ship. Then they discovered the skeletons. There were 12 of them, and judging by the position of the bodies and the discarded weapons, they died in battle. This was confirmed when a ship's log was found, in which their exploits and a map of the island were recorded. Fortunately, the latter contained useful information about the sources of water and food. Apparently, wild pigs are found on the island. It was also confirmed that the island was uninhabited at that time. The survivors of the ship had been alone for almost 3 years and, like themselves, had no idea of their whereabouts, as they were blown off course during a storm that lasted several weeks. Over the course of several evenings, Margaret read out their story. More than 20 people survived the first crash, but over time they also lost people due to injuries and illnesses. Small disputes were recorded at the end of the magazine, which gave rise to resentment and eventually hatred, aggravated by isolation, fear, and lack of food. "My God," Tom said, "it looks like Lord of the Flies." Then he outlined the plot of the book, in which a group of boys, also abandoned on the island, turned against each other with savage cruelty. Partly because of the magazine and some disagreements in their group, they decided to elect a leader and agree on some principles. Margaret was chosen quickly and without any opposition. The principles were more complex, but they settled on the following. Survival is the main goal, including food, water, and shelter. Alarm was chosen as the next priority. Tom suggested collecting all the mirrors and shiny surfaces to signal. He ignored Adam's, rugby team captain, quip that the tail of an airplane is a more obvious signal. It wasn't worth arguing. The fact that the plane was washed away the next day later confirmed his point of view. They also agreed to maintain signal beacons and work together as a community, sharing everything. All decisions will be made for the benefit of the entire group by the leader, but everyone will have the right to vote on key issues. Bill added another priority, to bury the dead, both recent and skeletons, sadly adding that they now include Amy, a lonely traveler who died peacefully in her sleep without regaining consciousness. Partly to record her demise, Tom began to add their history to the ship's log. Everything started well enough for the group. There was shelter and water, but there was not enough food, and they organized food extraction, hunting, and underwater fishing. At first, they were sure they would be found, but they never saw a single plane. Tom realized that they had been carried for several hours during the storm, and wondered if there was even a flight plan, because the airfield was rudimentary at best, nothing more than a rough grass path. He also wondered how strong the storm was in the region, and if everyone was recovering from the cyclone, would they even look for a small random charter flight? However, I decided to keep this information to myself. As the hope of a quick rescue faded, outbursts of anger began to appear. A few weeks later, quarrels began over the women, with accusations of flirting. It was mostly between Mike's younger husband and members of the rugby team, whom he accused of groping his wife, Kelly. Tom noticed that the captain of the rugby team, Adam, was constantly hanging around his wife, Helen, and the youngest guy on the team, Dan, was around Mary. He tried to quietly inform Helen about this so as not to start another argument. She treated his concern rather dismissively. It didn't help that their clothes were getting more and more worn out, exposing quite a lot of bare skin. It came to a fight. Zach, one of the rugby players, hit Kelly's husband, Mike, who retaliated in a rage. By the time they were separated, Zach, the rugby player, was unconscious and bleeding heavily. Margaret called for restraint, pointing out that they do not have medical supplies and will not be able to treat serious injuries. The rugby players were furious over their friend's injury, and discontent between the factions was growing rapidly. It was Adam who explained that they should have everything in common, but there is something that was not shared. The three married guys were furious. It almost came to a new fight. Margaret only managed to calm the situation by telling everyone to disperse and cool off. Margaret discussed her problems with each of the wives, subtly asking if any of them wanted to offer comfort to the young guys. Their testosterone was clearly on edge. Helen, as always, was direct and precise. "Our husbands will never tolerate this." Mike might give in to Kelly. He didn't want to hurt Zach at all. Opinions were divided and no decision was made. "Try mentioning this to your husbands. See what they say. Expect them to object, but read between the words. See if there is a hidden recognition in them of how precarious our position is." The discussions that followed did not lead to anything other than an increase in tension. They discussed the issue again at a meeting with everyone. Adam demanded a vote due to the importance of the issue and the current impasse. Margaret agreed, but only to see how things were going. All women had a choice in this matter. 4 young men voted for the division of comfort, as it was worded, and 3 husbands voted against. Mary and Kelly also voted against it. It's almost settled, Tom thought, but was completely stunned when Helen voted yes. He looked at her in complete disbelief. Since Zach couldn't vote, despite Adam's statement that he would be in favor, the deciding vote now belonged to Margaret. Margaret noticed the tension and insisted that everyone think about their voices, as nothing would happen for several days. "I would encourage you all to discuss the possible consequences. Our continued survival depends on it." Helen was trying to explain her voice to Tom. "This is serious. We are already fighting and everything can only escalate. Zach may not survive, which you think will happen if he dies. Compared to that, a little affair is nothing. This is ridiculous. They are half your age. It will cause even more quarrels and resentments, and you seem to be too involved. Look around, Tom. There's no one their age here except Kelly, and she's already having to deal with everyone fighting over her. It's natural that they need female company. At their age, they should be dating, and they haven't been on a date for months. We are lost and trying to survive. In this situation, social norms do not apply. Who knows when or even if we get off this island, you can't expect 20-year-old guys to suddenly become celibate indefinitely. How convenient for you. We can't expect that, but it seems we can discard the vows we made to each other. It's a big problem only if you make it so. It doesn't mean that I think less about you, but you didn't think that I could think worse of you, my future unfaithful wife. Of course I've thought about it, but I know that you understand my reasoning and are strong enough to handle the situation. What happens if Adam demands to take over? You won't be able to fight everyone. We need a way to appease them. Margaret had a quiet conversation with Kelly and Mary, asking about the consequences depending on how the vote goes. In particular, whether they would agree to make a group decision on an issue that they, as individuals, had every right to reject. This was not a decision she wanted to impose on her wives. A few days later, Margaret appeared before the group. As I have already explained, we cannot afford injuries. Even minor cuts and bruises can get infected and become fatal. We have no effective medicines and nothing that would help Zach recover. I've talked to all of you young guys, and you've admitted that you're upset and angry, not knowing how long we're going to be here. We cannot ask you not to be attracted to the opposite sex, and you do not have the opportunity to do what is natural now. We must accept that this is a separate, emergency situation. In this environment, the usual expectations and boundaries no longer apply. We have a different type of community where, as we agreed, everything is in common, and we take care of all of us as a group. The arguments were all the same as Helen had previously given. Tom wondered if they had come together to agree on their script. I am happy to offer myself, but I understand that at 57 I can be unattractive to young men. I think I would have made the same offer if I were younger and in your place. You know, I was pretty in my day. She added the last comment, trying to bring a little humor to a difficult situation. Greg, one of the young guys, broke into the conversation. I would like to accept this offer, and I think that you are still very attractive, and I really appreciate that you are ready to do this. It would be an honor for me. Margaret smiled. Thank you, I agree. And if and when Zach gets well, I'll take care of him too. There were an equal number of wives and unmarried men. The mathematics and conclusions were obvious. One at a time. Mary tried to suppress the feeling of panic. Now everything was becoming too real. She said she would support the overall decision, as would Kelly. I instruct each wife to take a lover. This is my decision as a leader. Don't blame or try to change anyone's mind. We all have to accept this for the good of the group as a whole. This is absolute nonsense. You can't vote for someone to do this, or vote for us to just accept it. All the wives have agreed to accept the results of the vote, Bill. Margaret tried to say it kindly, but it didn't help, judging by the devastated look Bill was staring at Mary. Margaret continued, Each wife will draw a straw. The one who draws the longest straw will choose her lover first. After that, the wives will be obliged to take care of his needs in the same way as their husbands. There should be no relationship outside of these agreements. Lovers should treat both wives and husbands with absolute respect, realizing that this can cause severe stress and difficulties. Nothing will happen for a few days until we get used to this idea, and we will keep everything under control. Tom ran away, followed quickly by Bill. Helen and Mary ran after them, trying to convince them that everything was for the best and that everything would work out. The next day, Mary caught Helen looking at young guys. Do you decide which one of them you like? Life on the island seemed mundane to Helen, and she had to admit that she liked looking at young guys. They are all in such good physical shape, with developed muscles and tone. The idea of taking care of some of their needs seemed very attractive. Have you seen Adam? Is he so fit? Mary smiled. Yes, it's hard not to notice him. And Steve began to walk around with a boner, not paying attention to others. To survive, we need fit young guys. Oh, I don't know. Actually, your Tom works harder. Only he can hunt and fish with any success. The younger guys just pose better. So, what do you think about it? Did you vote against the agreements? I think I don't mind, but it's not something I would have thought about before the accident. But I'm worried about Bill. He doesn't talk much. I think he can handle it, if I pay attention to him. Helen wasn't paying much attention as she watched Adam approach. Her mind was busy comparing him to Brad Pitt in the movie Troy. Hi, Helen. I just wanted to ask if this happens. Do you already know who you would choose? Not really. I assumed that you would all want Kelly to choose you. She is 23, and she is beautiful after all. Oh, I don't know. You and Mary are very attractive, mature women. I'm sure that any of us will be happy if you want to take care of us. I hope that you will consider me as an option. Actually, I'm shocked. Why me? Well, mostly because I like you as a person, we get along well, and it can be a long-term thing. But physically, you're hot. But I don't think she looks like Kelly. Yes, but I like you better, your figure. Slim, like an hourglass, and Kelly is flatter. I like your curves, it's a real female figure. I can say one thing for sure. You excite me every day and I would love to take you. Adam laughed to himself and added, I like your eyes and face. The next day, Adam was completely naked by the stream and washing when he saw Helen approaching. Helen stood as if mesmerized. Adam smiled and finally, Helen looked away and disappeared. At the same time, Mary was talking to Dan. Can I just say that if this happens, I hope that you will consider my candidacy? Mary was puzzled. I'm much older than you. What are you, 25? 23. But I like you. I really like you. You're funny, easy to talk to, and you're so caring. You and Margaret are the glue that holds us all together. Oh yes, I didn't know you thought that of me. There's something else. You're a confident, experienced woman, and I think you could guide me. God, I'm not a surrogate therapist or teacher. Are you sure? Mary laughed. Oh, you impudent one. Afterwards, Mary thought about it. After all, she is an experienced married woman, and Dan is so young. Obviously, the guys made their choice and tried to establish emotional ties with married women before the selection began. It was very timely and purposeful, as Margaret announced that the selection would take place the next day, which immediately led to the moment of the relationship between wives and lovers. Tom sat in the group and waited in horror for this moment. He was sure that the women had thought about their choice in advance in order to avoid any conflict, and as a result, he would get the worst possible outcome. 3 wives drew straws. The longest one was drawn by Helen, who gave her the right of first choice. She walked up to Adam, smiled and led him by the hand into one of the shelters. Adam's expression of joy was the polar opposite of Tom's expression of rage. He thought about rushing after them, but she made a decision, and it was her own free choice. He sat motionless, trying to keep the bile rising in his stomach. Mary was next and chose Dan. She nodded to him, but did not move from her place to go with him. Kelly was left with Steve. Mary turned to her husband Bill. Why don't you, Tom, and Mike go for a walk? It'll be easier that way. She waited until they were getting ready and went over to Dan. Just before leaving the camp, Tom heard the first moans of Helen's passion. He couldn't stand it and rushed forward. When the husbands returned about an hour later, everyone was sitting around the campfire except Helen and Adam. Mary tried to stop Tom when he came to the shelter. Tom, don't. He looked inside and saw Adam between his wife's legs using her. Her nails dug into his back. Then he heard a muffled conversation. You like this young guy, don't you, Helen? Yes, I like him. How long have you wanted him? A few weeks. What did you think when you saw him by the stream? That he is impressive, big. Tom turned around, picked up his backpack, and left the camp. The rest of the camp looked at each other awkwardly, but realized that it was better not to try to stop him. Eventually, Helen and Adam left the shelter and returned to the campfire. Noticing Tom's absence, Helen looked at Mary. They came back about 30 minutes ago. You were still there. Busy. He looked into the shelter and ran away. Helen panicked. 30 minutes ago. Heck, what's the matter? Mary asked anxiously. I said something, and if he heard it, then it's bad. Adam intervened, placing his hand on Helen's thigh. Don't worry, Helen, he has to accept the new order of things, and if he doesn't accept it, it means that we will have more time. Helen ignored Adam, thinking it was idiotic of her to get carried away and make love to him in bed. The first time was frantic and fast. The second was calmer, but no less exciting. Mary was talking to Bill, trying to calm him down. How are you doing? About all this? Bill shrugged his shoulders. Actually, it's pretty shitty. I'm sorry, I never thought it would be so difficult. Dan was normal, if it helps. Respectful and attentive. He knows how difficult it is for you. We didn't make love. I just offered him a little release. Bill looked at her blankly. We kissed. We thought it would be easier to wait until you went hunting. I guess at least you're not as obviously impatient as Helen. Maybe it's easier to just announce that we are no longer married and not together. What? No, don't ever say that. I love you more than anything in the world. Nothing will change that. It's just going to help us survive. If the band breaks up, we'll become like those skeletons turning on each other. Don't be so sure that your decisions won't lead to this, Mary. This accumulated anger works both ways. Tom didn't come back that night. Despite what the young guys thought, Tom was more competent than any of them, but his current mental state could be guessed. Despite her anxiety, Helen allowed Adam to go to bed with her again that night. Mary spent the night with her husband Bill and tried to warn her friend to focus on her husband. When Tom did not return the next morning, they decided to send search parties. Tom hunted for 2 days and for the first time did not return to the camp with the results, but enjoyed the sweet taste of a wild pig alone. He heard the search parties and easily bypassed them, returning to the main camp. Unfortunately, Helen was waiting for him there, alone. When she saw him, she lowered her eyes. He ignored her and sat down by the fire. She asked if they could talk. Tom thought that sooner or later it would have to happen. "I'm sorry about what I did to Adam. It was more sharply than I wanted." "What a sincere apology," Tom grinned. "Besides, we got carried away and I didn't want you to see or hear that." "No, I think you wanted to save yourself." Helen closed her eyes as she heard the echo of her own words. "Come on, Tom. Grow up. You know that this is all talk, part of increasing someone's desire and arousal. It's all nonsense, and his ego needs to be fueled." "You know what, Helen? I don't believe a word you say anymore. Look at me, Tom. I'm over 40 now. In the real world, I wouldn't have that chance. And what if it was Jennifer Lawrence or Scarlett Johansson thrown in here and they needed a release? You'd really say no or secretly use them, which would be even worse. Maybe you just don't know me as well as you think you do. But let's say you're right, and I couldn't resist. I wouldn't stick it in your face. You barely waited until you had the first choice. Spread your legs for that cute bastard, dumped me. I didn't leave you. But I admit that I got carried away. I'm sorry." "Why him? He's such a jerk. An arrogant freak and pretty useless in terms of helping us survive. He can't do a damn thing. Your making love to him is not for the sake of survival, but only because you wanted to use him. You obviously don't regret doing this. You just regret that you seem too involved." "Well, yes, there's probably something in that. I'm not going to choose the smallest and most unattractive guy to amuse your ego. I like Adam, and you're going to have to accept that and admit that there's a different reality here. So there won't even be an apology? Do I just have to put up with it? I think then it's clear to me where I am." Eventually, the others returned to the camp. Margaret talked to everyone, trying to forestall the inevitable discontent and anger. She thought that if they could get through the next few days, then everything would calm down. She was furious at Adam and Helen. Their actions had jeopardized the whole plan. Now Tom is a problem. He's sitting a little apart from the group, and only Bill seemed to be able to get him to talk. Margaret announced that they needed to agree on some rules to relieve the tension caused by the implementation of consolation. She continued, "The wives said that at home they make love once or twice a week, so they have enough time to comfort their lovers without compromising their husband's usual lifestyle. So we get 2 days and they get 5, Bill shouted. "No, we were thinking about a couple of days with each partner and breaks in between for the sake of rest." Kelly laughed. "Yes, we may need a few days of rest." None of the guys laughed, but Kelly continued, "Come on, if all this is unpleasant for us, then what's the point? We should just have fun and not worry about it. In the real world, we wouldn't do that, but here it's just a détente, not love or a relationship." "Husbands should not be neglected or embarrassed," Margaret said, looking directly at Helen and Adam. "This is absolutely normal. I have never refused my husband. Tonight will be spent with the husbands to reconnect, and let the lovers try to find some food for a change. We definitely need it. The couples will agree on their own, and if they don't agree on something, I will be the arbitrator." Tom tried his best not to, but couldn't resist using Helen. It felt completely different. Like sleeping with a stranger, making love was tough. The sight of Helen with Adam and her words tormented him. He was completely at a loss, and Helen felt it. "You know I'm yours, don't you?" "I don't like him." "You've never felt less like mine, Helen. I am yours forever. Please do not doubt it. How do you want to organize our time together? You just can't wait. Do whatever you want. I will often go hunting. Don't be like that. We have to deal with this. You're still my priority." Helen dropped the subject, hoping that Tom would calm down, and wishing that she had followed Mary's example and been more delicate. When she woke up the next day, Tom was gone. She thought he would calm down soon, although the lack of communication with her husband the previous night had bothered her. Tom stayed away from the camp. Without the food that he supplied, the others began to starve. Eventually, Bill tracked him down and discovered that Tom had built himself a mini-camp. Bill explained the situation. They fished and hunted together. Bill tried to learn and brought food to the camp. While Bill was tracking Tom, Mary was walking along the beach with Dan. "How's Bill doing?" "I think he's doing fine." I understand that you are not doing this of your own free will, but I want you to like it. We don't have to do anything you don't like." Mary smiled at Dan. "You're just lovely." She turned and kissed him. It was a hot, sultry kiss, exploring each other completely. His reaction was quite obvious, and Mary felt a sudden excitement, after which she led him back to the shelter. If Dan expected to see a timid and shy wife, he was mistaken. Mary unbuttoned her blouse. "I saw you looking at them. Would you like to take a closer look at them?" Mary decided that if she was doing this, then she shouldn't hold back. She was like an obsessive. After that, every time Bill went hunting, Mary and Dan spent time together, making love like rabbits. Tom turned to Bill. "How do you deal with it, seeing Mary with another guy?" Bill shrugged his shoulders. "I just try not to pay attention to it. It's easier to cope if you just forget about what might be going on between them. And I don't seem to be able to handle it at all. Mary makes it easier than Helen. She at least seems restrained and constantly checks how I'm doing, and our time together seems to be the same." Tom's time apart from the group allowed him to explore the island. He made a difficult climb to the highest point and was able to make out another distant island, as well as a spot on the horizon that could just be another island. This made him wonder if their island was part of the archipelago chain. While checking another bay for a potential place for fish traps, he saw this. An old hollowed-out canoe made of a tree trunk washed up to the tide line. He pulled it out and examined it. It was almost intact, but it was sitting low in the water. Over the next few days, he managed to fix it and make a rough paddle. He sailed it to the main camp, thinking it was surprisingly sturdy. The others were surprised to see him and delighted, deciding that the canoe would increase their chances of catching more fish. Tom and Bill set to work to make better oars using oars from an old wreck. After finishing their work, they tried to fish, each time going further away. For greater stability, they added outdoor floats and practiced stacking water, food, and spare paddles by attaching them to the canoe with twine made from leaves. Even though Tom returned to the main camp, he continued to ignore Helen. It has been 3 weeks since the preparations for the consolation of the guys began. Helen tried to talk to Tom again. "I miss you very much, Tom. Please stay with me at the camp. I only gave Adam for 2 nights even though you weren't here. And what do you want, a fucking medal? Others have accepted it, why can't you? You know that Kelly, Michael, and Steve feel comfortable as a threesome, constantly sharing a shelter. And Bill has adjusted to Mary looking out for Dan. Can't you find a way?" "No, I can't. But you have fulfilled your wish." "It wasn't my wish. I'm so lonely without you, Adam, to be honest, a bit of an asshole. Please take me back. I'm sorry, I really liked him, and I got carried away. I didn't mean to seem so impatient or neglect you. I just wanted to get it over with. Come on, Helen. You were more than passionate, and you were hardly in a hurry to get it over with." "Okay, I meant that I wanted to sort everything out and sort everything out. I still want us to be together. I hate the thought of you being all alone. Please let me keep an eye on you. The whole idea was to avoid any conflicts. You got what you wanted and you barely thought about me, treated me like shit. Actually, you can't do that to someone you claim to love. But I love you. I thought you could handle it. You're stronger than any of us. You know, I think you're right about that at least." Tom explained to Bill and Margaret his idea. He would use a canoe to try to get to the next island, and from there, see if there was a second one. If it is an archipelago, then there may be more islands, and he will be able to jump from one to the other, perhaps crossing the sea routes and having a chance to escape. They both thought he was crazy, but he and Bill got to work preparing. News of his plan quickly became public knowledge. Helen came up to Tom as he was loading a barrel of water onto a canoe. "Please tell me it's not because of what I did?" Tears were streaming down her face. "Don't leave, I'll break up with Adam. I have to try. This place is driving me crazy, and not just me." Tom himself was surprised at how little he valued Helen's opinion now. Once he would have done anything not to upset her. But not now. Tom asked Bill to stay and look after their wives. "I suppose they have other men ready to do it." "Maybe, but you and Mary still have something, and this one-person thing has a lower draft. I have a better chance alone. There are enough supplies for longer." Bill couldn't argue with that logic, but he also understood that his friend was just protecting him. The farewell was emotional. Everyone came, even Adam, although he kept his distance. He was hugged and wished good luck. Tom was even able to hug a sobbing Helen. Watching Tom slowly disappear, Adam thought it was a win-win. Either they would be saved, or he would have Helen forever, and he was looking forward to their first night together. That thought was quickly dispelled when he approached her. Fuck off. We might as well have killed him. He's a better man than you'll ever be, and I threw him away. Margaret overheard the comment and thought the assessment was pretty accurate. She regretted her involvement in the whole sad story and the loss of her best hunter and breadwinner. Paddling was incredibly difficult, especially with the currents and winds knocking him off course to the east. He was glad that he had done so many training swims and had built up some muscles. At times he saw shark fins and quickly pulled out baited hooks. It took Tom 2 days to get to the island he saw from the top of the mountain. He waited out the bad weather, found some fresh water, and tried to use the high ground to determine his destination, and was discouraged. There was absolutely nothing in sight. Perhaps the second island was just a cloud. He could have gone back, a sensible decision. He almost had enough supplies, or he could have sailed on. Thinking about the survivors on the old plane helped him make a decision. Swim on. He decided to sail east again, hoping that any archipelago should continue in approximately the same direction, if there are other islands there. After 3 days of rowing, when he slept very little and felt dizzy from dehydration, he noticed another island and landed next to a deep crevice in the jungle canopy in the hope of finding fresh water. The landing was difficult due to the reef surf, but he coped, and, to his delight, found a freshwater stream from which he drank greedily. When he woke up next to the stream, he didn't know if he had lost consciousness or just fallen asleep. He rested and drank often, terribly pleased that he could urinate again. Slightly refreshed, but left with almost no food, he had to make the same decision again, head further east and hope for the best or return. But he did not think that there would be enough food for him to return. And he set off again, quickly losing count of the hours, and then the days. The food was long gone, the water ran out on the 4th day. The sea seemed endless. Water, there is water everywhere, and there is not a drop to drink. The lines from Coleridge's poem have never been more appropriate. He could no longer row from fatigue and let the canoe drift. In a brief flash of consciousness, he vaguely thought that everything was hopeless, but at least he made a good attempt. Then, on the 5th day, he saw her. The boat remembered the mirror in his backpack, was able to pull it out and used it to reflect sunlight and try to signal the ship. Not a boat, but a ship. And as he approached, he laughed inwardly. Fuck you, Adam. The mirror worked after all. Tom didn't remember much of what happened next, just some memories of the ship and mention of others. He was taken off the ship by a military helicopter and taken to the hospital, by which time he was hallucinating and severely dehydrated. Despite this, he described the islands well and where the others are located. The next few weeks were a series of hospitals, procedures, and questions from the authorities and insurance companies. Tom had an emotional reunion with Helen, and then with the whole group. They repeatedly thanked him for their survival. Margaret informed Tom that just before the rescue, the group had agreed that the comfort conditions should not be mentioned or reported to anyone else. Bill did not forget to pick up the old ship's log and gave it to Tom as a keepsake, and in gratitude for the fact that an old friend saved him. A storm broke out in the media around their story. Suddenly, there were requests for all kinds of interviews on television, articles in magazines, and publications in the press. Tom and Bill tried to avoid this. The rest of the group, including their wives, were not so restrained. Ghostwriters were already working on a book and a film adaptation in one of the book publishers, and a whole support team began giving interviews and writing TV series about their stay on the island. Tom and Bill began to resent the content of some. In some memoirs, the authors took credit for what they did not do. Since Tom and Bill provided little information, it was easier for publishers to present Adam as the heroic leader who saved the group. Tom and Bill sat together thinking about their marriages. Bill stated that Mary repeatedly apologized for going to the island with Dan and asked if they could leave everything there, saying that the circumstances were so complicated that it had nothing to do with their normal life together. Bill was trying his best to do just that. No doubt she was trying her best to shield him from her actions, and he hoped that they would return to normal life. Tom nodded, saying that Helen was saying about the same thing, but they were still distant from each other. There was an emotional void, and they hardly spoke. Helen tried to reconcile with Tom again, saying that he should be allowed to celebrate himself as the hero who saved them all, and not sit in the shadows in the background. I'd rather focus on saving our marriage, but you seem more concerned about this whole media circus. We can make a lot of money at this circus, and I want to be proud of my husband, who saved us, and that we were together as a couple like everyone else. I haven't done anything to be ashamed of, and I don't understand why I'm an outcast. At least I've been honest about my desires. Not like Mary. What about Mary? Nothing. What is it exactly? Well, she was hardly innocent long before the consolation was agreed upon. That's how it all started, and yet she came out of it like a saint. Her marriage remained intact. Tom was shocked and faced a dilemma. Should he tell Bill? Helen could have lied or exaggerated to make herself look good. The book's release was approaching. Even Tom couldn't avoid an event that would mark the signing of a filmmaking agreement. The TV special supporting the book was supposed to include interviews with them all. Tom and Bill were dressed in costumes that they couldn't get used to. Their wives, however, looked simply stunning. Elegant evening dresses emphasized the weight loss and deep natural tan gained during their stay on the island. Helen hugged Mary as soon as they saw each other. They immediately talked about the state of their marriages. They saw Adam, Dan, Greg, and Steve at the far end of the room. Zach was still in the long-term rehabilitation unit. God, just look at them. They look like a walking wet dream, all washed and cleaned. Do you miss Dan? Mary stopped, looked around before whispering, "To be honest, yes, he was young, energetic, and handsome. So yes, I really miss him. But everything is still not smooth with Bill." Helen replied, "We are far beyond smoothness. Tom is definitely cold. I can't reach him. Give him time. It's hard for them to come to terms with this. We can no longer claim to be faithful wives, and we didn't really strive." "To be honest, Mary, I think we're done, and if that's the case, I'm wondering if I should give Adam another try." Bill started the subsequent storm after he saw another video clip where Adam says that he was the one who provided most of the food for the group. He loudly proclaimed, "What kind of nonsense is this?" Everything that Adam just described was done by Tom. The publishers hurried to intervene and tried to hush up this outbreak, saying that there are different memories and that everyone has their own point of view. Bill was escorted out, but Adam was furious that he had been exposed. By the time Tom calmed Bill down and they returned to the main room, Adam and Dan were talking to Helen and Mary. Tom approached the small group. "And what do we have here? Just getting to know your wives again. That's right, maybe you and I should get to know each other outside. Come on, Tom, don't do that. We know each other. Close, after all. Anyway, we just asked if Helen and Mary were going to a party at the publisher's apartment. I don't think you guys want to come because you made an exceptionally small contribution to the writing of the series, despite the fact that it brought us all a lot of money." Tom turned to Helen. "And you want to go?" Helen shrugged, saying nothing. "Go to a party or go with that asshole?" "Well, we haven't made love since we got back. Unless, of course, you want to take me back to your bed as your wife. I'll be glad if you do it. You're making the same choice again, Helen, only this time there's no excuse for survival." Adam intervened. "Come on, Tom, this is nothing new. We made love hundreds of times on the island, and I remember that Helen always enjoyed it." Mary was alarmed. She pulled Bill aside and said quietly, "Don't pay attention to Helen. She's trying to make Tom jealous so he'll take her back. It's just a party. And you want to go to it? Yes, it does not matter much, but it is part of the requirements of the media. However, given your previous outburst of emotion, it would be better if you didn't go." He looked at her, hoping she wouldn't go. If Mary hadn't been looking at Dan, she might have noticed Bill's look or realized that he had said bye instead of the usual, "Have a nice evening." Anyway, she turned around and left with the others. Adam looked back at Tom and grinned as they left. He had a clear intention to use Helen. And again, Tom can't do anything about it. He was pretty sure that Dan would also make another attempt to get Mary. Tom and Bill reluctantly trudged to the bar, defeated, their last hopes for the return of their wives fading fast. They sat in silence for a few minutes, and it seemed like several hours. "Well, what's the deal?" Bill replied with a long sigh. "Yes, I agree." The next day, Helen and Mary immediately rushed to an official promotional event, a series of blitz date-style interviews with various members of the press. Mary was still reproaching herself for falling asleep exhausted after talking to Dan. However, she was able to convince Bill that everything was innocent, and after the late end, the publishers placed them in different rooms. Helen and Mary's first interview with a national television channel began with a presentation and a few warm-up questions. "So, Mary, what is the secret of your survival?" "Well, I would say that in difficult times we worked together. We took care of each other. That was our guiding principle." Helen, were there any conflict zones? There must have been some tension when survival was at stake. There were some things, but we overcame them by focusing on the important things. And how are things going after your return home? To be honest, it is difficult to adapt. I think we're still recovering from what happened to us. There was news in the morning papers that you actually cared about some guys more than others. What? What do you mean? Your husbands have just published excerpts from their own memoirs about the island, which say that the women on the island were pretty compliant. What? Tom? He couldn't. Do you know who the father of Kelly's baby is? What? Oh my God. Is Kelly pregnant? And how are Adam and Dan doing, Mary, as we understand you were with them last night? At that moment, the bedlam began. Mary ran away, sobbing, while more and more press gathered to ask questions. The publishers tried their best to save both women. Bill, reluctantly agreeing with Tom, said, "I never would have thought that Mary would leave with them again. Thank you for telling me about what she was doing on the island." Margaret also admitted the truth when I cornered her. This gave them the go-ahead to move forward. The old ship's log, which Tom kept, described in detail all the events on the island. Upon returning home, he handed it to his friend, who worked at the Sunday newspaper. His friend worked with Tom and Bill on drafts of articles and writing a major series. The newspaper couldn't wait to release the article, especially since it completely undermined the official version of a major publishing house, but they needed Tom or Bill's confirmation. They were worried that Tom would refuse to participate, but they agreed. That if they held her back, it would make the story even louder. They will be able to take advantage of the official advertising of the start of sales, using that to increase sales with the help of a juicy sensation. Serial publications and short inserts can cost a fortune. Tom refrained, worried about Mary and Bill, but everything changed. Mary's decision to go to the party decided their fate. The true story was revealed as soon as possible. The press speculated about what happened, and it became known as Love Island. The wives were ashamed when Helen and Mary read the newspapers. They cried, "My God, this is worse than I thought. It makes us look like complete fools." Adam, Dan, and Steve fared no better. Using the wife of the guy who saved your life and taking credit for it, they were disgraced and ostracized. Finally, Tom and Bill agreed to meet with their wives on the condition that they sign the divorce papers that the lawyers were working on. "Why did you do this to us, Tom? What, did you tell the truth? You said you had nothing to be ashamed of and you didn't do anything wrong, so I shared that opinion, just like you announced your little vote on the island. For God's sake, Tom, you've ruined us. Me, Mary, and everyone else. I think I've given you about as much attention as you've given me on this fucking island. I have no sympathy for any of the women or guys who used you while living off our hard work. The only people I cared about were Bill and Mike, and they agree with that." "Mike? And what does he have to do with all this?" "It turns out that Kelly planned to run away with Steve if he turns out to be the father of her child. You're all worth each other. I had no idea that we had offended you so much. Rather, you didn't care. But anyway, I have to thank you." "For what?" "You gave me the incentive to hit the road and escape, otherwise we'd all still be there. Let some of us have more fun than others." Mary interrupted him by turning to Bill. "I was trying to be careful and protect you, Bill. It was about survival. Do we have any chance?" "No. The fact that you jerked them off was a revelation. Then you did it the same way as Helen, but behind my back. She was honest about that, at least, and that night at the party after the interview showed your true self. Don't bother denying it." Mary lowered her eyes, blushing. "I don't like him." "I believe not, but you couldn't wait for that little bastard to get between your legs again, could you? If you don't love, then it's even worse, so you left us for a simple love affair. I hope it was worth it." Mary began to sob. "Of course he wasn't worth it. I became greedy and stupid. I want us to live together, to do everything that we planned. I beg you, take me back, Bill. I'll do whatever you want. I want the wife I had before that trip, but you can't offer it anymore. She's gone. So now I want you, the cheating wife, to leave me alone forever." This comment caused Mary to cry hysterically. Helen was made of sterner stuff. She refused to cry, but she couldn't keep her head up either. Tom finished the meeting. "Goodbye, Helen, and please, don't stay in touch." For the survivors, money became a problem. The official book had to be withdrawn, as it was extremely discredited, and all offers were withdrawn. Publishers have also filed claims for damages to recover their expenses. Accident insurance payments helped them stay afloat. Tom and Bill had no such problems, as their memoirs became bestsellers. They have postponed negotiations on further deals until their divorces are settled. Reputation was another matter. The couple were shunned in their hometown. Mary's conservative family completely disowned her. She moved, but at every turn she was harassed by the press. Helen tried to bluff by answering in the press that she had done nothing wrong. We survived. Without these actions, we would have quarreled and worked against each other. People should not make comments until they find themselves in a live or die position. Her response even won her a few supporters. She was infamous and became a popular target for young womanizers. Although no one would risk starting the real relationship with her that she craved, she just couldn't be trusted. Tom and Bill remained best friends and continued their wanderings. Wealth made life easier, and there were more and more adventures, because now none of them needed to work. In addition, while traveling, they met women. None of them was in a hurry to settle down, and both were a little shy. But they were full of optimism that this would happen in due time. But in the meantime, it was a lot of fun to practice.